Hello, everyone. This is Robert Landau, Live Life Well TV host with another episode of America's Greatest Personalities. This is part one of a two-part episode concerning the unbelievably great Charlie Chaplin. We wanted to put this into two episodes because there is so much information to share concerning his amazing life story. So for this episode, we're going to deal with his early years, and for part two that will be uploaded next week, we will look at Charlie Chaplin's last years. So let's begin. Here are some things that the great Charlie Chaplin was famous for saying. Chaplin once said, and I love this, "A day without laughter is a day wasted." Chaplin also said, "Actors search for rejection. If they don't get it, they reject themselves." Mr. Chaplin also said, "Life is a tragedy when seen in close-up, but a comedy in long shot." Charlie also said, "Failure is unimportant. It takes courage to make a fool of yourself." He also said, "The saddest thing I can ever imagine is to get used to luxury." Here are some things that you might not have known about the great Charlie Chaplin, and I call this section, Did You Know? Did you know that Charlie Chaplin once won third prize in a Charlie Chaplin look-alike contest? Did you know that Stan Laurel of Laurel and Hardy was Chaplin's understudy on the English stage? Did you know that long after becoming a millionaire, Charlie continued to live in a shabby hotel room and kept the large checks that he would receive from the studios in a trunk for months? Did you know that Chaplin's bowler hat and cane were sold for $150,000 back in 1987? Did you know that Charlie was the first actor to ever appear on the cover of Time magazine? The date of that issue was July 6th, 1925. Did you know that few people realize that Chaplin was an amazingly accomplished musician and composer, and to that end would write the scores for many of his silent films? Did you know that in 1978, Chaplin's corpse was stolen from its grave and was not recovered for no less than 3 months? It is now reburied in a vault surrounded by cement. Good idea. Charlie Chaplin was all of the following: a comic, a rebel, a humanist, a comedian, an empath, and one of the greatest artists in all of the 20th century. Charles Spencer Chaplin was born in London on April 6, 1889. His parents, Charles and Anna Chaplin, were music hall entertainers. Charlie was taught to sing before he could act and danced as soon as he could walk. I think it's very interesting to note that Chaplin was told at a very early age that one day he was going to grow up to become one of the most famous people in the world. Now, think of how incredibly helpful that can be to a child when that type of message comes from the heart and not from the ego. And it went straight to Charlie's heart at such a young age because he would buy into this and firmly believed it, and thus wanted to do everything that he could to make being one of the most famous people in the world happen. Unfortunately, like so many of the personalities that we discuss in this series, Charlie's childhood was anything but happy. In fact, it could be termed a disaster. He and his half-brother Sidney came from what could best be described as a broken home. A number of years after the birth of Charlie, Charles Sr. separated from Hannah. Apparently, Charles Sr. had this urge to perform in New York City. So one day, he just decided to up and leave his family to do so. Hannah decided to resurrect her stage career, but unfortunately failed at that miserably. It seems that whenever she would sing on the stage, she would often be unable to get through a song without some sort of major mishap occurring. Young Charlie, who by this time was all of 5 years of age, would often stand in the wings watching her and watching her flub songs that she would try to sing. When his mother would be unable to finish a song, the stage manager would grab young Charlie at 5 years of age and push him out on the stage and insisted he would sing that song from start to finish. He, young Charlie, was such a major hit doing that, that the audience would often demand encores, and often, get this, they would even throw money at him. So, at a very early age, Charlie got bit by the performing artist bug. It really was so natural for him. He felt very comfortable out on the stage, not so in the rest of his life, the rest of his childhood. His mother was broke and could not afford to care for her 2 boys any longer. Her mental stability also began to fail, and when Charlie was 7 years of age, get this, his mother was committed to an infirmary. Charlie was all of a sudden alone. He found himself at a workhouse in the outskirts of London. He was scared, he was lonely. A workhouse was kind of like an orphanage. He was also looking for a way out of this life of poverty and loneliness and deprivation and rejection. Then he remembered his singing debut back when he was 5. If he could feel so much better out on stage and make some money to eat being out on stage, well, my goodness, what a deal. At least it would prevent him from living some of his young life on the streets. A number of years later, at 12 years of age, Chaplin worked his way into a traveling music hall troupe and was one of a performing group with that troupe called the 8 Lancashire Lads. What did this group do specifically? They were a clog dancing act. Yeah, you heard me, a clog dancing act. Did he relish clogging? Well, probably not, but you know what? It wasn't even a question of liking it or not. He had to do it to make money, otherwise it would be back to the orphanage, a fate that he considered worse than death. It was time to break out now and go to the next stage of his fledgling career. Along with Sidney, his half-brother, Charlie joined a famous comedy troupe. Fred Carno was the leader of this troupe and ended up becoming one of Charlie's most important mentors. On February 3rd, 1908, Chaplin made his debut with the Fred Carno group, and he was only 17 years of age when he did so. Chaplin would eventually become one of the most popular child stars in all of the UK. Could Charlie share this major accomplishment with his parents because he so wanted to? Unfortunately not. His father died due to severe alcoholism, and his mother was too far gone, living out the rest of her life in an insane asylum. There was no denying that Charlie was so talented and received such support from his audiences in return. He was soon elevated to lead performer in this performing troupe. And if that wasn't enough, Fred Karno personally handpicked Charlie to be one of the leads when his troupe would bring their act to the States in September of 1908. The Karno Company specialized in something that they called speechless comedy. So what do you think that means? Mime, pantomime, and the combination of satire coupled with pantomime. Charlie and the Karno troupe were nothing short of a sensation in the States, even more so than in their homeland of Britain. Why? Because vaudeville was hot in the States at the time. Americans quickly caught on to the unique form of entertainment that the Karno troupe was offering. These were such important years for Charlie. Many refer to these years as his apprentice years for good reason. During these years, he would own his craft. Chaplin found out what worked and what didn't work. That's what was so cool about vaudeville, because you would be doing shows probably like 8 times a week or more, sometimes 3 times a day. And if that isn't good training, I don't know what is for the performing arts. It was also at this point in time that Chaplin became intensely interested in not only acting, but in the entire process of film production. A whole new world opened up for Charlie. Even though he was on the outside looking in, he was ready to step in that door and take full advantage of all of that fine art had to offer. Chaplin would spend many nights on his American tour with the Karno troupe, talking to the manager of the Karno Company about the film industry. That gentleman's name was Al Reeves. Ever the entrepreneur, one night Chaplin suggested that he and Reeves form a partnership of sorts. The year was 1910, and the two gentlemen combined their savings and excitedly purchased a motion picture camera. And here was the plan. They would film the comedy troupe during rehearsals and then market that film. What an idea. I mean, really think about it. Everything was already there for them. Everything was already in place. The sets, the venues, the actors, the energy, the responsiveness, such as it was. I mean, everything. It was as if it was built in a studio just waiting to be discovered and filmed. The plans for now only remain plans, as the touring schedule was just way too intense to also worry about producing films on the side. But this one event says so much about the young Charlie Chaplin. He already wanted to become his own boss, number one. Number two, he already wanted to produce his own films. Number three, he already wanted to figure out a way to market the films that he would produce. And number four, he already wanted to be the star performer in these films as well. It's a good thing, though, that Charlie didn't decide to go off on his own with Al Reeves just yet. Because at only 20 years of age, Charlie Chaplin was about to be discovered in a huge way. The nonstop exhausting tour made its way finally to New York City and set up camp in a theater on New York City's 42nd Street. One night, I love these stories, one night, as luck would have it, a certain Mr. Mack Sennett of the famous Keystone Film Company just happened to be sitting in the audience of that 42nd Street theater. He knew exactly what he was looking for and immediately fixed his eye on the scene-stealing Chaplin on that stage. Well, and the rest is history. Sennett had heard of Chaplin years before, and he felt that now was the time to grab him. It was 1913, and a meeting with Sennett's representative and Chaplin was quickly arranged in New York City. Here was the offer: a one-year contract at Keystone Film Company in LA for an astounding, get this, $150,000 a week. 1913, $150,000 a week in LA. Can you imagine how Charlie Chaplin must have felt? This was double the salary that Chaplin was earning with the Carno Touring Company. Did Chaplin accept the generous offer? No, no. Chaplin skillfully negotiated $25 more per week after the first 3 months. So how about that? And it was accepted. Chaplin would finish his tour with the Carno Company, and then it was off to LA in December of 1913. Sennett and Chaplin finally met face to face, and to say the least, Sennett was shocked. These were his words, Sennett's words. What I had seen in New York was a deft, experienced, knockabout, roughneck, middle-aged comedian of the music hall type. In Los Angeles, I met a boy. Chaplin was only 24 years old, Sennett said. This tells you what a master of an actor Chaplin was on the stage. By the end of his very first month with Keystone Studios, Chaplin was assigned his very first movie role. And it wasn't just a movie role, it was the lead in his very first picture. But it was in his second film that Chaplin would strike gold. And it's interesting to note how he struck gold. It was with his costume. Chaplin was an introvert when he was off camera and didn't socialize much with anyone. The fact that he was British and in the midst of a sea of Americans at that studio didn't help matters either. But in front of the camera, he was an entirely different energy in front of the camera, just like he was on that 42nd Theater stage, that 42nd Street Theater stage, when Sennett first saw him. Chaplin was also quite small, and when he stood next to everybody else, well, he needed to do what he needed to do to sort of stand out from the crowd. Chaplin got to thinking about how he could really look different and get noticed by the film going public when they would see him up on the screen, particularly if he was standing in a crowd. To this end, he collected used clothing and assembled his now legendary Little Tramp costume. It was from used clothing stores. He also created a full and complete character to go with those clothes, to go with that costume. His character would make its first appearance in Chaplin's second movie, made in 1914, called Kid Auto Races at Venice. Think of it, folks, what a brilliant piece of marketing this was on Chaplin's behalf. He knew that if he looked different enough and created a character that the audience would notice, that audience would never forget it, and he would have it made. And that was exactly what happened. For the next 30 years, all of Chaplin's films would feature this beloved little tramp character. Audiences ate it up, and Chaplin knew it. The image of Chaplin's little tramp is literally one of the most enduring screen images of all time. Think of it. If you think of Charlie Chaplin right now, what do you immediately picture? The little tramp. This is the genius of Chaplin's invention. This is amazing, the workings of his mind. Amazing. Audiences loved that character as his popularity began to grow. The interesting thing about Chaplin was that he always knew what he wanted, and he was never afraid of getting it. He knew what worked. It was almost as if he had a built-in sense of cinema further down the road. Because he had such a clear vision of where he wanted things to go with his career, he was often a challenge to work with. He wanted it all, which also meant he wanted to do it all. And by that I mean, he not only wanted to act, but he wanted to direct. And if that wasn't enough, he also wanted to produce as well. He was the total package, with his finger on the pulse of what the audiences were dying to see at that point in time. That didn't mean that directors enjoyed working with Chaplin. Often Chaplin would insist that a scene of his be played in a certain way. If his director didn't agree with him, there were major problems. Often production would come to a screeching halt because of what Chaplin wanted and didn't happen to be what the director wanted. Mack Sennett would have to be called in to all too often smooth the waters over. In only 3 months with Keystone Studios, Chaplin wanted to be a director. This was a very coveted position at the studio. Sennett would only give that position to people he trusted and had plenty of previous experience in the fine art of direction. So why would he even consider Chaplin for this particular honor? Because in Chaplin's first 3 months at Keystone, he became the most important asset that Keystone Studios had. One day, Chaplin went to Sennett and made the following offer. If Sennett would agree to make Chaplin the director of all future movies that Chaplin would appear in, Chaplin would agree to accept financial responsibility for all of these films that Chaplin would also direct. Chaplin had only $1,500 in savings, and even offered to deposit that savings, every last penny of it, into a bank account as collateral to support this offer. If Chaplin's next movie didn't make a profit, the money in Chaplin's bank account would cover the loss. Did Sennett elevate Chaplin to the status of director after only being with the studio for 3 months? What do you think? You bet he did. Sennett was no fool. Chaplin was overjoyed as he now felt he had more control over his films and was one step closer to producing his movies, which would give him then total control. Chaplin now realized that he had 4 months to go before his contract was up with Keystone. So what did he do? He negotiated a raise with Senate. Chaplin boldly asked for no less than $1,000 a week more. That was even more than Senate was making himself. Did Chaplin get it? What do you think? No. Senate successfully stalled negotiations until Chaplin's contract ran out. 4 months passed, and Chaplin was really concerned about where his career was going to go now. He wasn't brave enough or financially secure enough to go out on his own just yet, but he didn't want to stay with Sennett's big studio either. So, just in a nick of time, Chaplin was approached by the S&A Film Company. Already the leader in the industry when it came to Westerns, S&A needed a boost in their comedy film division and hoped Chaplin would be their ticket to success in that area. So get this. On January 2nd, 1915, Chaplin signed a contract with S&A for a weekly salary of $1,250 plus a signing bonus of no less than $10,000 in 1915. Wow. Chaplin also asked that his brother Sidney become his exclusive manager, and Sidney happily accepted. Between Sidney's business expertise and Charlie's acting prowess, each comedy short that Chaplin would now make would earn the studio more than $100,000 per short, something absolutely unheard of in those days for comedy shorts. Chaplin's contract was quickly renegotiated, and he was now entitled to receive a $10,000 bonus, get this, for each and every film that he would make. It was 1915, and Charlie Chaplin's little tramp character was all the rage in the USA. S&A promoted its and Chaplin's image to the max in the form of postcards, books, posters, sheet music, you name it. And the public ate it up. There were cartoons of Chaplin and comic strips that ran in papers as well. This was the first time in the movie industry that paraphernalia related to a star was pushed on the public, something that is all too common in that industry today. But Chaplin was the first. He was so popular that Charlie Chaplin amateur contests sprouted up across the country. It seems that everyone wanted to impersonate the little tramp. Listen to the names of some of the teenagers that participated in many of these contests. Walt Disney, Bob Hope, director Mervyn LeRoy, and Milton Berle. Milton Berle and Bob Hope won Charlie Chaplin lookalike contests. In Chaplin's 1915 film classic, The Tramp, he created new and innovative ways to give his character heart and intelligence. No longer were his films simply filled with comic gags. Now there was an actual story, and you actually felt for the character that Chaplin was creating. But now Chaplin's contract was up at S&A, and he would end up staying, do you think? No. He actually got a much better offer from a studio called Mutual. Chaplin knew that apart from Mary Pickford, he was indeed the biggest box office draw in the country. So now he had clout. Maybe that's why on February 27th, 1916, at the age of 26, Mutual Studios agreed to give Chaplin all of the following: a $10,000 weekly salary, a $150,000 signing bonus, his own studio in Hollywood, and all of this, folks, was a $500,000 deal. Totally unheard of at this point in time. Chaplin gave half of his signing bonus of $150,000 to his brother Sidney, knowing that without Sidney's incredible and superior guidance, Charlie wouldn't be in the privileged position that he now found himself in. Chaplin's years at Mutual would be the most fulfilling and creative years of his life. Films like The Floor Walker, The Cure, Easy Street, The Immigrant, and The Adventurer were all a result of this period of Charlie's incredible career. The production values of a film short were never richer and more professional thanks to Charlie Chaplin. The sets, the costumes, storylines, the character development were of such a high standard, something that Hollywood had never seen before. Chaplin would receive $1 million for his next 12 films with Mutual, but as was his pattern, Chaplin wanted more. His drive was amazing. He wanted to produce his own films, his own feature-length films. We ain't talking about shorts anymore here, folks. To do this, he formed his own production company where he would make longer films and not as many per year. He wanted to take his time with each and every picture to ensure the quality he was after was present in each and every full-length feature film that he would now produce. Charlie Chaplin Productions was the name, and it was well on its way. Now, at last, Chaplin could have total control. He could not only act, write, compose, and direct, but now he could also produce. At last, he was what he always dreamed he could be, an independent Hollywood filmmaker. But all was not rosy on the horizon. Once Chaplin left Mutual, he signed with a studio called First National. His deal was worth a cool $1 million. Chaplin was the first actor ever to earn that amount of money. And that's where his troubles began. Well, that and the fact that he married a Hollywood starlet who was only 16 years of age by the name of Mildred Harris. Charlie was 28. She, Mildred Harris, was 16. The combination of his newly found troubles at First National and his marriage to Mildred were way too much for him to handle. And the ultimate happened. You won't believe it when you hear it, and Chaplin's life would never be the same again. But more about that next episode. Ha! I gotcha. This has been Robert Landau. Yes, I'm going to do it to you. This has been Robert Landau with part one of The Amazing Charlie Chaplin. We'll pick up where we left off with part two and talk about his remaining years. Thank you so much for your time, your attention, and we'll see you on part two. We'll post that next week. Thank you, everybody, for listening. This has been Robert Landau.